This week I saw an inspirational poster, and although the quote on it wasn't the most profound, it caught my attention. It said simply, "You never forget the neighborhood kids you grew up with." Do you remember the neighborhood kids that you grew up with? I see some nods. The two streets that I grew up on in Albany, New York were full of children, and I can remember the name of every single one of them. The Wallace family with 7 kids who lived across the street. My best friend Emma and her 3 very brotherly older brothers. The 3 quiet girls who lived in the house at the end of the dead-end street. I also remember Mrs. Oliver, the old Italian lady who always invited me over for cookies. And the friendly man 2 houses down who smoked a pipe and had a very sweet little poodle dog named Sassy. I have vivid sensory memories of their homes, their kitchens, their yards, and their families. Clearly they had an influence on me, so I'm guessing that I did on them as well. We had fun together, and sometimes we helped each other get in trouble. But these people were my village. The world is made up of such villages, communities of people who come together based on proximity, a shared interest or identity, family relationships, or a common goal or mission. The internet and social networking make it possible for new villages and groups to be formed every day. Each of us is part of many villages: family, workplace, neighborhood, social groups, church. Who are the people in your villages? According to the beloved skit on Sesame Street, they're the people you meet every day. They're also the people that you see or speak with maybe once a week when you gather for some meeting or activity. The people closest to you, the people you interact with most on Facebook and Twitter, the people you may not see or talk to on a regular basis, but with whom you share a lot in common. Maybe you see them just once a year at a conference or a retreat or a reunion. All of these are our fellow villagers. Villagers share something in common, proximity, identity, or interests, but are often diverse groups of people otherwise. Theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "The person who's in love with their vision of community will destroy it. But the person who loves the people around them will create community everywhere they go." This is an interesting idea, I think. If we're in love with a vision of community, we destroy it or at least cause it to become stagnant. But if we love the people around us, love our neighbors as ourselves, we will create community everywhere we go. This week's chapter in our summer book, which we've been taking chapter by chapter throughout this season, Soul of a Citizen by Paul Loeb, talks about the power of community and also about its limitations. Sometimes we experience what Loeb calls misplaced politeness. We don't want to bring up controversial issues because it might make people uncomfortable, create tension, jeopardize friendships, or trigger family fights. So we stick with the easy topics: movies, sports, food, the weather. We want to preserve the cohesion of the village. I bet there were many, many 4th of July picnics where conversation about the recent Supreme Court decisions was avoided like the plague. And although everyone has heard about it and is following it to some extent, many of us shy away from discussing the verdict in the George Zimmerman trial with family or neighbors. There are risks, certainly, in these conversations, and there are appropriate and inappropriate times to have them. But if we wish to bring about change and to live with conviction, as Paul Loeb puts it, we must begin with those who are closest to us, the people in our villages. Every community or village, regardless of its composition, has relational power. Community organizer Ernesto Cortez says relational power is both collectively effective and individually transformative. Individual transformation within our villages happens through one person influencing another. There's a story about Cesar Chavez, community organizer and the leader of the United Farm Workers. There were 3 young organizers eager to learn from the best who drove through the night to see Chavez at his home. And when they got there, they sat down to talk, and they said, "Tell us the secret to being a good organizer." And Chavez replied, "Well, first you talk to one person, and then you talk to another person." And they interrupted him and said, "No, we want to hear how it really works, what you've done that's making your organizing so successful." And Chavez was silent for a moment. And then he said, "Well, first you talk to one person, and then you talk to another person. If we want to work for change, whether it's changing the color of the carpet at church, changing the vendors that we use at work, or changing the systems of our society to be more just, it begins with talking to one person and then talking to another person." It's also important to cultivate an awareness of our spheres of influence. This week's chapter begins with these words from Karl Hess. He said, "To carry the message of a cause in a community when you are a generally respected neighbor is far better than when you do it as virtually your sole activity in public. As a generally respected neighbor in our villages, we have influence. But if we go as a stranger to some other group, we may not get very far. This is why the most influential voices in an AA meeting are those who have struggled with addiction themselves, from one villager to another. This is why the most influential voices among teen mothers are those who have been teen mothers themselves, again, from one villager to another. If I, who have been a vegetarian for 13 years, try to convince a meat eater to stop eating meat, it probably won't work. If someone who's had a cell phone since the 1980s when they first became commercially available tries to convince someone who's never had a cell phone to get a smartphone, that probably won't work either. But it might work coming from someone who just recently got a cell phone, who can speak to why they made the decision to do so. If I go up to a stranger on the street and scold them for throwing their candy wrapper on the ground, they won't listen to me. They might even retaliate. But if their friend next to them says, "Hey man, don't do that," maybe they'll listen. Our villages are where we exercise influence because we know others and we are known. From one villager to another, we use our relational power to bring about individual transformation. Paul Loeb, in his book, shares many stories about fishermen, bowlers, surfers, and Baptists who reach out to other fishermen and bowlers and surfers and Baptists, like reaching out to like, to build village power and to make a difference on some issue that's important to them. This is where change begins and where relational power becomes collectively effective. Last year, I was serving as ministerial intern at our Unitarian Universalist Church in San Antonio, and I helped to lead the congregation through a process of reflection on and recommitment to its identity as a welcoming congregation. We identified ways in which the congregation was very welcoming and affirming in areas where we had some room to learn and to grow and to do better. We also found, as we expected, quite a range of opinions about the process within the congregation. Some people were passionate about it and highly engaged and believed that we had room to grow and wanted to be a part of that. Others were supportive of it, but didn't necessarily come to any of the programs. And others thought, well, we're already welcoming, so why are we doing this? It's just stirring up problems. Some cared a lot, and some weren't interested at all. This is pretty natural. With any change process, this is the case, as I'm sure you've experienced. So we asked the question, how can we bring about further growth and change in the congregation if not everyone is on board, and if some people are even actively resisting it? We decided that we could be most effective if we built on our existing relationships and reached out to people we were closest with. If the gung-ho supporters talked to the supportive but uninvolved, and the supportive but uninvolved talked to the people who were resisting, And the involved board members talk to the uninvolved board members, and the involved choir members talk to the uninvolved choir members. That's how we could be collectively effective in strengthening our identity as a welcoming congregation. We use these overlapping villages to our advantage. Natalie Briscoe, one of our denomination staff people that serves this congregation and other Unitarian Universalist congregations in this region, says, "You can only change a relationship of which you are a part." This is why it's important to be aware of our relationships, our influence, and the villages where we are known. Natalie comes from the village of Texas, but recently lived for a couple years in Seattle, Washington. She says that when she talked about Texas politics there, the most common response from Washingtonians was, "Why would you want to live there?" As she pointed out to these well-meaning folks, racism, classism, sexism, and other problems exist everywhere. Culture and laws may be different, but we are all interconnected. And as Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Natalie says, maybe if more people who want justice for everyone came here to Texas or stayed here, we could make it better. We can only change a relationship of which we are a part. That's why this New Yorker, who comes from a land of many problems of its own, is happy to be here in Texas. In this morning's reading, the story of young John Lewis and his cousins walking with the wind, they stayed in the house. They came together as a village connected by family ties in the face of terrifying storms. They joined hands and they literally held the house down. They didn't leave it, they didn't run away. They moved as a whole to the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then when another corner began lifting in the storm, they moved there. What an image. That reading is almost a sermon in itself. 15 light little bodies and their aunt did together what they couldn't do alone. They were collectively effective. One village that we all share in this room, whether you're here for the first time or the 1,000th time, is this church. We are one very big village, First Unitarian Church of Dallas, with many smaller villages within it. This next year, one exciting thing that is beginning is that this church will build on this village model by creating neighborhood groups. Small groups that will meet in congregants' homes, in neighborhoods around the city, and use the small group ministry model for spiritual deepening and fellowship. This church as a whole is a very large village, and so small groups like these are an essential way to get connected and involved. Transformation of ourselves and of the world begins in small groups. What makes us here a village is that we come together around a shared affirmation or covenant and with a goal of spiritual deepening and serving others, both within this village, within these walls, and in our larger world. We don't all agree on everything, and we aren't all alike in every way, yet there's a power in the community that we create here. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe that all people are worthy of love and justice, and that each person carries a spark of the divine goodness in them. And this allows us to live as Bonhoeffer suggests, loving people around us and creating community everywhere we go. The villages that we are a part of and that you are a part of are a starting point for change. But in order to have a larger impact, we must overcome barriers of difference and partner with other villages, with people who are religiously, politically, and culturally different than us. Villages need not be insular, though that's one understanding of them. Next Sunday, Reverend White will explore how we open our hearts to difference and widen these circles that we are a part of. So this week, as you encounter your neighbors, the people you meet each day, and those who are closest to you, I encourage you to reflect on the villages that you're a part of and your role within them. Where can you make a difference? In an individual life or in the collective life? Stay there, clasp hands with others, and together may you walk with the wind. Amen.